headlines, South Korea offers to hold high-level talks with North Korea next week on the reunion of separated families, as well as other issues of mutual concern. An in-depth look at Korea's Google Naver's messenger service application line, looking to go global. And Iraq's prime minister is taking his struggle to keep his job to the courts after announcing he will file a legal complaint against the country's newly elected president. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Thanks for joining us tonight. South Korea has proposed a fresh round of high-level talks to North Korea next week to discuss issues of mutual concern. Pyongyang has yet to respond, but Seoul's offer is fueling hopes for a possible breakthrough in inter-Korean relations. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea reached out to North Korea on Monday, proposing high-level talks next Tuesday at the border village of Panmunjom. If held, it would be the second high-level meeting between the two Koreas since President Park Geun-hye took office. South Korean Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae said a wide range of issues could be up for discussion.
We are planning to discuss reunions for families separated by the Korean War, as well as other issues of mutual interest.
The proposal for talks came on the same day South Korea decided to provide more than $13 million in aid to North Korea through the World Food Program and World Health Organization. The Unification Ministry said it will use the Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund to offer $7 million worth of nutritional assistance to mothers and children in the North via the WFP and $6.3 million in medical aid through the WHO.
We will provide $7 million to the WFP for nutritional assistance to mothers and children in the North. We will also offer $6.3 million through the WHO for medicine, improvement of medical facilities, and medical training programs.
Experts say South Korea is accelerating efforts to improve inter-Korean relations ahead of President Park Geun-hye's Liberation Day speech on Friday, where she is expected to introduce further measures to better ties. The latest developments, coupled with Pope Francis' message of peace and reconciliation during his visit to South Korea this week, are fueling fresh hopes for a change in tone on the Korean peninsula. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
But before this proposal came through earlier today, top foreign diplomats in Asia spoke with one voice in urging North Korea to end its missile and nuclear threats. So that was at the annual ASEAN Regional Forum over this weekend. Ji Myung-gil has the details.
The foreign ministers at this year's ASEAN Regional Forum in Myanmar lobbed strong criticism at North Korea over its recent string of provocations, which include missile launches and threats of another nuclear test. The top diplomats urged Pyongyang to adhere to the UN Security Council resolutions.
Most foreign ministers agreed that tensions on the Korean peninsula stem from North Korean threats and its nuclear weapons development, and said it was a grave violation of UN Security Council resolutions.
But Pyongyang repeatedly justified its nuclear weapons program, blaming what it calls Washington's hostile policies and its joint military exercises with Seoul.
Our nuclear deterrence exists because of the United States' endless hostile policies, its military pressure, and nuclear threats that date back over 50 years.
Although the two Koreas did not hold any talks at the forum, North Korea did engage in bilateral meetings with Japan and China. Beijing says the top diplomats of North Korea and China met and discussed issues of common concern against the backdrop of growing frustration over North Korea's defiant pursuit of nuclear weapons. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
On the sidelines of that ASEAN Regional Forum, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry urged China to take further measures to ease tensions over maritime disputes in the Asia-Pacific region. Speaking to his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi over the weekend, Kerry called on Beijing to manage conflicts in the South China Sea based on international law. The Chinese minister, however, rebuffed Kerry's proposal, saying Beijing needs to protect its regional sovereignty. sovereignty. The South China Sea has been the center of long-standing territorial disputes between China and Vietnam, as well as other Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Taiwan. Pope Francis is set to arrive in South Korea in 3 days' time, and Seoul is getting ready for this papal visit. Various roads in central Seoul will be closed this week, with the Pope scheduled to be in the capital on Saturday, August 16th, to attend a beatification mass. The Seoul Metropolitan Government says access will be restricted to some roads around Gwanghwamun Square starting today and will be extended during the week. On the day of the mass, major roads around the square will be totally closed off. Bus routes will also be adjusted, and subway trains will not stop at Gyeongbokgung Station, Gwanghwamun Station, and City Hall Station on the day of the ceremony. The Seoul High Court handed down a commuted sentence to a leftist lawmaker accused of treason on this Monday. If the sentence holds, Lee Seok-gi will spend the next 9 years in jail. Connie Lee has more.
Lawmaker Lee Seok-gi was sentenced to 9 years behind bars on Monday on charges of incitement and violating national security law. The Seoul High Court also imposed a 7-year ban on serving in parliament. Back in February, a lower court sentenced Lee to 12 years in jail, but the judge on Monday commuted it, citing a lack of evidence that Lee actually conspired to stage a rebellion or had the means to overthrow the South Korean government. Lee, a member of the left-wing United Progressive Party, was arrested last September and found guilty of plotting an armed rebellion against the South Korean government in February, making him the nation's first sitting lawmaker to be convicted of treason since the 1980s. Prosecutors had demanded a 20-year prison term for Lee, claiming he led an underground group of 130 members with alleged links to North Korea. Lee has always denied the charges, with his party saying that he's a victim of a witch hunt. However, it was confirmed that the lawmaker did praise North Korea and did speak about how South Korea should prepare for an attack from Pyongyang. Lee claims that he had organized the groups solely for peaceful purposes. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Korea's defense ministry has decided to set up a consultative council to address human rights violations within the military. This in line of a recent bullying scandal where a private was allegedly bullied to death. The council will be jointly led by Army officials and external specialists, and education will be a big part of this plan. Once privates join the Army, they will have to attend 11 sessions of human rights courses, totaling at least 9 hours. Special instructors will be placed in Army units, and all military servicemen will be taught how to respond in situations involving violence or abuse. The council will also be in charge of monitoring compliance and devising countermeasures.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. If you live in Korea, you will know that the most widely used messenger application is KakaoTalk. But if you look a little beyond that, you will notice that Korea's Line is a bit more popular in neighboring countries. And our UDN tells us this company, which is a subsidiary of Korea's Google, Naver, is setting its eyes even further.
From cups and credit cards to coffee cans and even subway trains. These characters are just some of the emoticons available online, one of the world's top messaging application companies. The Korean firm has amassed over 400 million users, mostly in Asia. And Line believes these emoticons, so-called stickers, that have been localized to different cultures, have been key to their success.
In the Islamic cultural area, there's Ramadan, so we made characters that look hungry. For countries like Brazil and Turkey, we made our characters look more muscular because our cutesy characters aren't popular there.
The exploding popularity of these stickers has given birth to a wide range of spin-off merchandise, and offline stores are popping up around Asia, with Seoul being no exception. This is Coney the Rabbit, a mascot for Line, and it's the popularity of characters like this that has made the store a major tourist destination. It's taken sales per day up to $15,000. And now Line is aiming to take a leap further into the US and European markets. It's preparing to list its shares in Tokyo and is also considering New York as it tries to get the financial backing it needs to take on its rival Tencent's WeChat or Facebook's WhatsApp. And their prospects are looking pretty good.
Line has caught up to Twitter by 90% in terms of sales and about 70% in terms of users. At this rate, Line may be valued at $28 billion by early next year and exceed Twitter's market value.
But for all the hype, some still warn that Line has yet to prove its successful formula outside of Asia.
There's an obvious bubble, and you could even call it the Line bubble. Either its stock could stabilize on the back of strong growth, or it could burst and their stock would plunge.
Analysts say the next few years will be decisive in the global messaging market as users tend to stick to the most widely used app. Line says it will focus on expanding its user base from continent to continent, hoping its culture-centric characters will win the hearts of new users. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye had some stern words for the country's political parties on this Monday. At a meeting with her senior secretaries, the president said politics exist for the people, not for the politicians themselves. She added the government and political community should take responsibility for delaying the passage of bills designed to revitalize the Korean economy. The president reminded that each and every one of those bills are closely linked to improving the people's livelihood and creating new jobs. President Park also urged her aides to work with the National Assembly to pass legislation designed to root out corruption by the end of this month, as well as to get to the bottom of the April ferry disaster. More and more foreign-made cars are being seen on the streets of Korea compared to a couple of years ago, and European cars in particular. And analysts say it shows a shift in preference among Korean drivers. Song Ji-sun tells us more.
European cars now account for 4 out of every 5 foreign cars shipped to Korea. Sales of imported cars jumped 40% in June from a year earlier to nearly 18,000. To grab a 15% share in the Korean auto market for the first time, according to Korea's Auto Importers and Distributors Association. The big jump was largely due to German vehicles. The biggest losers are Japanese brands, which now represent only 12% of imported cars, down from 36% in 2008. Industry analysts attribute the shrinking Japanese presence to the shift in consumer preference, as efficiency-conscious Korean drivers have turned their eyes to diesel models, especially for sedans. While the Germans roll out new diesel-powered sedans, Japanese automakers have expanded their lineups in the gasoline and hybrid models. In fact, 9 out of 10 best-selling imported cars are German-made diesel models. Korean auto buyers are increasingly preferring European-built cars, with British automakers accounting for 11%, and other European brands from France, Sweden, and Italy each accounting for about 1% of total imported car market share, all showing growth from the same period last year. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Of the 12 million foreign tourists who landed on Korean soil last year, 1/3 were from China. That number is expected to grow exponentially in the years to come. And this presents a unique challenge for Korea's tourism industry, offering proper accommodations. Park Ji-won tells us more.
The nearly 4 million Chinese tourists who entered Korea last year made up about 1/3 of the total number. It's a figure that has risen at a steady pace in recent years, up 34% annually on average over the past 5. And with a bilateral free trade agreement expected to be inked by the end of this year, the influx of Chinese tourists is expected to grow even more in the near future, with nearly 10 million people total from both countries going back and forth each year. To meet the demand, Korea's tourism infrastructure will need to adjust, particularly with regard to its accommodations. There were, for instance, nearly 28,000 rooms available in Seoul last year. That's just 1/5 the number of hotel rooms that Beijing or Tokyo offered. For the most popular range of hotel rooms, which cost between $80 to $100 per night, the number for Seoul drops to about 3,000. The Korea Tourism Organization estimates that at least 40,000 more hotel rooms will need to be created to meet the demand of Chinese tourists in the future. 박지원, ARIRANG News.
Over the weekend, a huge K-pop festival called KCON was held in Los Angeles. Top Korean stars such as G-Dragon, Teen Top, and B1A4 were there, but apparently it wasn't just the stars that captivated the crowd. Kim Min-ji fills us in.
Dancers passionately show off their sleek moves in step with their favorite K-pop music. This is KCON, North America's largest Hallyu or Korean Wave festival, which ran this past weekend in Los Angeles. The event, the third of its kind, drew some 20,000 fans.
K-pop is basically like my life. Every single day it's always K-pop, K-pop, K-pop.
Those in attendance got a chance to try Korean foods and even receive makeovers to look just like their favorite K-pop stars such as Tiffany from Girls' Generation.
I'm so excited that my hair looks like Tiffany's. I'm a huge fan of hers.
K-pop stars wave enthusiastically as they're greeted by the screams of joy from fans eager to get a glimpse of their beloved heroes in person. More than 100 Korean companies such as airlines and automakers joined the event to promote Korea. 36 small and medium-sized companies also took part, including cosmetic companies who saw a golden opportunity to promote their products.
I think American makeup, most girls tend to cake on the makeup, but Korean beauty is just more about looking natural and showing your natural beauty.
The festival reached its climax with spectacular performances by G-Dragon and IU. KCON is no longer just a Hallyu festival, but also means to drive economic growth. The event is expected to create an economic effect of over $260 million. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Kurdish forces in northern Iraq have retaken several towns from Islamic militants as support from U.S. airstrikes begin to turn the tide in this conflict. And for more, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center. Paul, while Iraqi troops continue to battle on the ground, it looks like Baghdad is facing a political crisis.
That's right. As fighting rages across the country, the Iraqi government has been gripped by political deadlock. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who is partly blamed for fomenting this latest insurgency, is refusing to give up power. This amid calls by Sunni, Kurdish, and even his fellow Shiite leaders to step aside. Our Shin Se-min has the latest.
Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is not denying calls to step down. He's taking in. During a speech on state television Sunday, Maliki said he will not drop his bid for a third term in office and intends to file a complaint against Iraq's new president for violating the constitution for political gains. Maliki claims President Fouad Massoum failed to name a prime minister from the country's largest parliamentary faction by a deadline on Sunday. The calls have grown louder for Maliki to step aside in favor of someone who can bring the nation together in the face of the growing threat posed by Islamic State militants. The United States launched a fourth round of airstrikes on Sunday in northern Iraq, helping Kurdish troops recapture large swaths of land there. But other towns remain in militants' hands, including Makhmar district, which is a short distance from Erbil, the capital of the Kurdistan region. Islamic State militants have so far killed at least 500 members of Iraq's Yazidi minority, including women and children, according to an Iraqi government minister on Sunday. Some 20,000 refugees who were trapped on Mount Sinjar have been rescued and moved to the Iraqi-Syrian border. Aside from the airstrikes, the Obama administration says it'll continue to push for an inclusive Iraqi government capable of handling the situation by itself. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And staying in the Middle East, Paul, a fresh ceasefire has gone into effect in the Gaza Strip as Egyptian officials pave the way for peace talks between top Israeli and Palestinian delegations. What's the latest on the situation?
Well, according to both sides, a 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire, which began at the stroke of midnight on Monday, is holding over Gaza and its border with Israel. Following the brief pause in the fighting, an Israeli delegation arrived in Cairo for indirect negotiations with Palestinian representatives aimed at reaching a sustainable truce in the region. Our Son Jong-in has this story.
Israel on Sunday accepted a new Gaza ceasefire proposed by Egyptian mediators. Earlier in the day, the Palestinian delegation in Cairo, which includes Hamas, also said it accepted Egypt's call for commitment to a 72-hour ceasefire and to resume talks on a more comprehensive agreement to end the fighting. The ceasefire is expected to create the atmosphere to resume humanitarian aid as well as indirect talks through Egypt to reach a more lasting pause. The move comes as hostilities between Israel and Hamas resumed over the weekend when the previous three-day ceasefire expired. Israel walked away from talks saying it would not negotiate under fire, while Hamas threatened to leave if Israel remained entrenched in its positions. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry said the new temporary ceasefire was intended to facilitate the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. It also urged both sides to use the truce to resume indirect negotiations immediately and work towards a complete and permanent ceasefire agreement. The over month-long conflict has so far left nearly 2,000 Palestinians dead and 10,000 injured. Israel has lost some 70 soldiers and 3 civilians to the war. Son Jong-in, ARIRANG News.
And turning now to Turkey, where the outgoing Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan has claimed victory in the country's first direct presidential election. What kind of reaction are we getting from the voters?
Well, in the largest city of Istanbul, the country's cultural and economic center, reactions have been mixed. Many were not surprised by the result, while others were disappointed by the presidential vote didn't go to a second round, with some newspaper headlines declaring it as a new era for Turkey. With nearly all the votes counted, according to the High Election Board, Erdogan had won by a narrow margin at nearly 52%. He still came ahead by 13 points of his closest rival from the main opposition, which had failed to unite against a single candidate. Celebrating in the capital, Ankara, Erdogan thanked all his supporters and vowed to reconcile a deeply divided country.
Brothers, I say this from the heart. Let's start a new social reconciliation period today, and let's leave the old discussions in the old Turkey. Let's leave tensions, culture of clashes, and virtual problems in the old Turkey.
President-elect Erdogan is set to be inaugurated on August 28th, with a presidential term good for the next 5 years, which until recently had been largely ceremonial. Opponents fear it will bring about an increasingly authoritarian rule, as Erdogan has been in power since 2003.
And finally, coming back to Asia, Paul, Typhoon Halong has ripped through Japan, leaving as many as 10 people dead and dozens more injured in this development. What's the current status on this typhoon?
Well, according to the National Weather Agency, Typhoon Halong has released its grip on the western mainland and is now moving away across the Sea of Japan. However, heavy rain and violent winds are continuing to batter the north of the country. The storm had made landfall on the largest and most populous island of Honshu, triggering landslides, floods, and even tornadoes. Authorities had ordered some 1.6 million people to evacuate from the path of the typhoon, as more than 470 buildings were destroyed in a prefecture north of Tokyo. The National Police Agency has yet to release an official death toll, but local media say as many as 10 had died, including an Iranian man, and it left at least 86 wounded. Halong is the 11th typhoon to hit the western Pacific region this season. Charity?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for those stories, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Due to the instability in the atmosphere, we're expecting thunderstorm in Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces tonight. And meanwhile, other regions can expect some cool autumn-like weather this evening. And by looking at tomorrow's weather, similar conditions are in store before nationwide rain enters the forecast later this week. Now, as for the Typhoon Halong, it's passed us by but left a low-pressure front that's still having an influence on the eastern and the southern coasts of the nation where high waves are being seen, so be careful when visiting the areas of the beaches. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out the Tuesday morning at 21 before reaching up to 30 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out at 32 and 30 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 29, while Dokdo hits 28, while Mankungang tops to 30. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Teddy.
All right, thank you very much, Michelle. And that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching and enjoy your evening.